So welcome to another video. So in this video I'm going to show you guys how to desolder a Raspberry Pi from the MintyPi board, or any other board where you have to solder the two together like this, like it's sandwiched. So this one here, I cleaned up a little bit just so you know the holes in the peaks where when people solder is not there. So the first method we got to do is we have to suck up as much of this solder as possible. Then we're going to need to use hot air just to pass heat evenly where we can lift up the Raspberry Pi, or in our case we're going to prop the board up and the weight of the Pi itself will just make it fall off. And I only do that once the solder is really melted evenly across all the GPIO, so you shouldn't have any kind of damage. So we're going to be using some goot wick or solder braid, whatever you want to call it, to suck up as much of the solder as we can. We also need flux. I use this one. You guys can use any other one you want. Just remember you have to clean it up. Liquid no clean flux can help, but I find the jelly kind like this, the pastes, works a lot better. You're going to need some kind of tip that has a nice good amount of surface area, such as like a hoof tip. This is a really good tip. The chisel also works pretty well, but personally I use the spatula tip that I've shown off already. This thing gets insane amount of surface area heat, so it can really do a good job really quick. So this I had to order from China. This is months back before any of this occurred, so if you order now it'll be a few weeks. So there's that bad boy right there. I got the 3 sets, so I got a smaller one and I also got a medium-sized one, but I use this big one for pretty much everything. This thing is just awesome to suck up solder or clean up pads. It's great. So we're going to start off by putting a little bit of flux on the pads here. We're going to try to suck up as much as we can from these GPIO. Just want to lay it flat on there. This thing smokes, so we're going to have to get a little ventilation going. You'll notice all the solder that I already picked up on there, and this is really good flux. It stays liquid for a while, and you can actually pick up quite a bit even though there's already a lot of solder on that part of the braid. At least it looks like there is. Don't be afraid to just go to a new area of the braid so you can pick up more of the solder. Don't worry about the residue and the mess. The plan is for us to clean this up after, you know. The ones that are staying behind, that are not emptying out, seem to be the ground. The ground always takes more heat, and even then it's in there usually pretty decently. As long as we get the other ones, that's our main concern. I see a couple over here. I'm going to try to suck them up at least a little bit more. I think that's good enough right there. Clean off our tip so the flux isn't still smoking as it is now. Okay, put the iron off to the side. I'm going to turn on a hot air. I'm going to show you guys how to prop this. So I'm using just my tweezers. There's a etched name on there. Just to prop this corner up, and then I'm going to use something heavy like, say, this needle nose pliers, just so it's propped. See, I can stick something in there. That's how much space there is. I'm just waiting for that to get the temp. I can probably shut this off now, the ventilation. Not going to need it. So the trick here is to, you want to go across the GPIO, you know, slowly. You don't need to go really fast because you want the heat to kind of sink in. So it's okay to stay in an area for a little bit, especially like the corners. It's usually where I find that it tends to stick more. It is getting a little smoky, so I'm going to turn on the ventilation again. Most important thing here is patience. I know a lot of people don't have patience. Then if you don't, you should not be doing this. I can already see solder starting to melt, so I know there's a good amount of heat over there. So we're moving real slow just so we can get the heat start to disperse this way towards the board. You don't want to pry or push down on the pie. You want it for it to come off by itself. Any kind of tugging or pulling, they'll likely rip off a pad, and that's more damage we probably got to fix. You know, I want to avoid any kind of damage. Trying to get the center a little hot, just because I see a few brown pads. Okay, it's getting molten. This one here in the corner. As the board heats up, the heat tends to stay around longer on the board, so you know you can go back and forth, start going a little quicker. You just want to try to get the heat dispersed evenly as much as possible after we warmed it up like we did. Also, you don't want to do this with an SD card inserted. Likely melt it. applying a good amount of heat to this. I can tell the ground pads on here are pretty solid. Even though I said not to push down on the pie, I'm going to put just a little bit of pressure, so this way as we heat up and the pads underneath get weak, the solder connection gets weak, we can actually break some of it off. Again, not a lot of pressure, I'm just barely pushing down on it. Okay, I heard some things already starting to go. Slowly see it's already lifting up. And I think we got it. And if you look closely, we don't have any lifted pads. Let me just you can see, especially if I turn it this way, the peaks. Those are the solder. That's the solder right there. Let me try to get it in close so you guys can see. That's what was holding it in place. There's a lot of solder in a couple of these pads. So now we're going to use the braid again and clean up this. And then we're going to try to clean up as much as we can on the pie itself. As you can see, not a single one ripped off or lifted. That's exactly what we want. Now, it all takes patience. A lot of people don't have patience, and this is why I see myself doing this type of work quite often. Over here we've done the back. It's as clean as we can get it, so let's do a little bit on the front. This makes our job a little easier when we resolder it back on. This particular pie has a lot of resistance going from the 3.3 volt to the ground, so I think it might be some kind of internal short, or it could have been a micro joint on between the pie and the control board. So we're going to clean this up, and that'll be the end of this video, because I'm not going to show you guys how to solder it back on, because I've done that in another video. So this video is just mainly to concentrate on the method and technique of how to get the Raspberry Pi off of the controller board without any damage to both. Primarily the MintyPi control board. Again, the most important thing here is tools. You got to make sure you have the right tools for the right job. If you don't have a hoof tip or that chisel tip or even this spatula tip, then you should not be doing this. You don't have hot air, you should not be doing this. There is another method without hot air, but you need something that can conduct a lot of heat, such as the spatula tip. I've done it before with just a solder braid and just this tip. But if you don't have the tools, then don't expect to get the same results. Can you do this without one of these tips and just hot air? You could, but you always risk a little bit of a chance that you could put too much pressure down. I put a little bit of pressure. You know, if you put too much pressure as you're heating it, and you've seen we didn't. There was some solder left on the board in certain spots inside the GPIO. So without sucking as much of it off, it becomes a much longer process, much harder, and you have a better chance of ripping off a pad or two. So sucking up as much as possible with a braid and a good flux and a good tip for this is key. Always want to clean your tips. So now this is kind of like a sloppy mess. I could see a few that were left behind. It's not a big deal. This is a ground, this is a ground, another ground. The grounds are the tough ones to really clean out. It's not too bad. It's not too bad of a deal. So the cleanup is either you have an ultrasonic cleaner, which I just happened to get one this week, so I'm looking forward to using that, or some alcohol and the toothbrush. I got an old toothbrush, and that's what I've been using. Just spray the alcohol on here and on there and just go to town. You want to clean up as much of the residue as you can. You want no residue. You know, this is what causes issues when people solder with using the flux. The flux gets in between, and a lot of times if it's not a good one, it can be corrosive, and most importantly, it can be conductive. So you get random button presses, power is you know, flaky or doesn't turn on. The pie gets really hot because there's a short somewhere, and there is no short. It's really just the flux that's being conductive, so it's touching a couple different pads, you know, and that's what always causes an issue. This is why I don't recommend anybody using flux to solder these two together. I use it to clean it up and to take it off. That's totally different. But what I'm doing, the most important part, is cleaning it up. And when you put solder paste here and you sandwich it too, how are you going to clean this up if it's in between the boards? Really hard. Without an ultrasonic cleaner, super hard to do. So best bet is not even use it, and do exactly like I did in the other video. Follow those instructions where I use no flux at all. It's just the right tip, the right equipment. So I think I'm going to end this video here. Unless you guys want to see me how I clean up, it's really not hard. Yeah, I got some alcohol in the spray bottle. Just spray it on there. Spray some on the brush. You want to use something to clean it up a little bit, because even though using the alcohol, it leaves a little bit of residue, a stickiness rather. It gets sticky. So as you can see, it's pretty clean already, and the alcohol dries really quick. So that's pretty clean. This one here, the same thing. Spray some on there. And I'm wiping it off. Now it's nice and clean. No more residue. It's exactly how we want it. That golden one there, that's just one with no solder. So the person didn't solder because these two GPIO pads are connected. So it's either one or the other. I like to do both. Always good to have a secure connection. So, and with that, I hope you guys learned something. Please don't attempt this if you don't have the right tools, because you're just going to end up damaging this. I'm not so worried about the Pi. The Pi is actually pretty robust. It's thick. You know, this can usually take a beating. But I've seen so many where people rip off the pads of this. In fact, I got some I can show you right now. This is what people have sent me. And I've, you know, how can I fix that? It's missing half the pads on the left, you know? So don't attempt it if you don't have the tools, and you need patience. There's no shortcut for this. You need to have patience, and you need to have the tools. But if you do have all the stuff, it's not that hard. You know, hopefully somebody out there that's interested in doing this has the tools, and now they have at least a guide on one way of doing it. Well, thanks for watching. I'd like to also thank my Patreons, which I'm going to have their names show up now, for supporting me. If you're interested in becoming a Patreon, I'll leave a link in the description. Patreons get access to all sorts of goodies, including digital downloads such as updated software. Also get to see things I'm working on, and you get first dibs 2 to 3 weeks before anybody gets dibs on any new hardware that I have that's coming out. For example, the Burger King Game Boy toys, the PCBs, I should have them possibly next week. They're not going to be available until August to the general public, but my Patreons will have access to it as soon as I get them. So maybe consider supporting me. If not, just hit that like button, and that will be good enough for me. Alright, thank you, and I hope I don't get any more crazy repairs like that after this video. Thanks, guys.